My late husband, Arthur, had a saying he was fond of. You don't buy a priceless vase and then leave it on a wobbly table. He was a man who understood the nature of value and the corresponding necessity of protection. He built an empire in shipping, navigating the treacherous waters of international trade with a brilliant, almost clairvoyant foresight. But the most priceless thing he ever possessed, he told me once, was our daughter, Isabel. And he worried, with a father's deep and primal fear, about the wobbly, unstable table she had chosen to place her life upon. My son-in-law, Julian Thorne. My name is Genevieve Croft. To the world, I am the quiet, elegant widow of a Titan, living out my days in the grand, silent mansion Arthur and I built together. But I was never just the Titan's wife. I was his partner, his strategist, his confidant. I sat in on the board meetings. I helped vet his acquisitions. I learned to read the subtle tells of a liar, the desperate sweat of a man in debt, the hungry, predatory ambition in the eyes of a charlatan. And in my son-in-law, Julian, I saw all three. If you are listening to this, please subscribe. This is not a story about a simple fall. It is a story about a carefully calculated push. It's a story about how I realized my life was in danger, and how I decided that the best defense was not a fortress, but a perfectly engineered trap. The change in Julian had been gradual at first, a slow, creeping rot beneath a surface of charm and filial affection. For the first few years of his marriage to my daughter, he was the perfect son-in-law, attentive, charming, always ready with a compliment or a small, thoughtful gift. He managed his own small investment firm, and while it was not in the same league as Arthur's empire, it seemed successful enough. Isabel, my sweet, gentle, and tragically naive daughter, was utterly besotted with him. She saw his ambition as drive, his expensive tastes as a sign of success. I saw a man living desperately beyond his means. After Arthur's passing 2 years ago, the rot began to accelerate. The subtle hints became brazen requests. Genevieve, the market is ripe for a new tech fund I'm launching. A small, seed investment of $250,000 would be a huge help. When I politely declined, citing the conservative nature of Arthur's estate, the charm began to curdle. His visits with Isabel, once a pleasant weekly ritual, became fraught with a new, ugly tension. He would walk through my home, his eyes scanning the paintings, the antiques, the first-edition books in my library, not with appreciation, but with the cold, calculating gaze of an auctioneer. He was not seeing a home. He was seeing a portfolio of liquidatable assets. "This is a lot of house for one person, isn't it?" he remarked one afternoon, running a hand over a priceless Louis XVI commode. "The overhead must be staggering. All this capital, just sitting here, collecting dust." "It's my home, Julian," I had replied, my voice level. "It is not a balance sheet." He would then turn his attention to my daughter. "Isabel, darling, your mother is all alone here. What if something were to happen? What if she were to fall? The stairs in this place are a death trap." He said it with a look of deep, loving concern, but his eyes, for a split second, would flicker towards the grand, sweeping marble staircase that dominated my foyer. And in that flicker, I saw not concern, but a cold, reptilian calculation. He was not just seeing the house as an asset, he was beginning to see my continued presence in it as a liability. The final, chilling confirmation came from my daughter herself. She called me one evening, her voice strained and tearful. Julian's investment firm, she admitted, was in trouble. He had made a series of disastrous bets on a volatile stock, and he was facing ruin. He was in debt, deep, desperate debt. "He just needs a bridge loan, Mother," she pleaded. "Just $1 million, to tide him over. He's so stressed, he's not sleeping. He says that your fortune is just sitting there, not doing anything, while he's fighting for his life." "My fortune, Isabel," I said gently, "is doing exactly what your father intended for it to do, providing for my security in my old age and for your future after I am gone." "But he needs it now," she cried, her loyalty to him completely blinding her to the grotesque nature of her own request. "He said that if you really loved me, you wouldn't let him fail." He said, "You're not getting any younger, and what's the point of having all that money if you don't use it to help family?" There it was, the final, ugly unveiling. My life, My very existence was now being framed as an obstacle to their financial salvation. My heart broke, not for myself, but for the daughter I had raised, a woman so thoroughly manipulated that she had become the willing mouthpiece for her husband's greed. After that call, I knew I could no longer be passive. Julian was not just a greedy man, he was a desperate one, and a desperate man is a dangerous animal. I thought of his comments about the staircase, the death trap. It was not a warning, it was a projection of his own dark, burgeoning ideas. I made a phone call, not to the police, but to a ghost from my husband's past, Mr. Gable. He had been the head of security for Arthur's global shipping empire for 30 years, a man who had forgotten more about surveillance, counter-surveillance, and human weakness than most intelligence agencies ever learn. He was retired now, living a quiet life in the countryside, but his loyalty to my husband's memory was absolute. "Genevieve," he said, his voice as calm and steady as it had been 2 decades ago when he'd briefed me on a pirate threat off the coast of Somalia. "I was wondering when you'd call. I saw Arthur's obituary. A great loss. How can I help?" I did not mince words. "Gable," I said, "I believe my son-in-law may be planning to harm me." There was no surprise in his voice, only a quiet, professional focus. "Give me the details." We met the next day. I explained the financial pressure, the veiled threats, Julian's obsessive comments about the staircase. Gable listened, his face impassive. When I was finished, he simply nodded. The pattern is classic. Desperation leading to aggression. The staircase is the logical theater for the act. It offers the perfect alibi, a tragic, accidental fall. "So what do we do?" I asked. "We don't prevent the act, Genevieve," he said, his eyes cold and clear. "We document it. We turn his chosen weapon into our own. We turn your house into a witness." For the next week, while I pretended to be considering Isabel's request for a loan, my home was transformed. Under the cover of a security system upgrade, Gable and his small, discreet team of professionals worked silently and efficiently. They installed a network of state-of-the-art, 4 Kelvins, motion-activated cameras throughout the house. They were no bigger than the head of a pin, hidden in the filigree of picture frames, in the recesses of chandeliers, in the carved wood of the banisters. They were invisible, undetectable. They installed pressure sensors on the stairs and audio recorders that could pick up a whisper from across the room. My home, my sanctuary, became a high-tech fortress, a stage, perfectly lit and wired for sound, waiting for the final, tragic performance to begin. And I, the intended victim, was now its silent, watchful director. The waiting was the hardest part. For a week, I lived in a state of suspended dread, a performer waiting in the wings for a play I had written, but whose final, violent scene I could not fully control. Every time Julian and Isabel visited, I felt a knot of cold fear tighten in my stomach. I was cordial, but distant. I told them I was consulting with my financial advisors about their loan request, a lie that bought me precious time but only seemed to inflame Julian's impatience. He became more agitated with each passing day. He would pace my study, picking up priceless artifacts and placing them down with a carelessness that was a form of aggression. He talked incessantly about his financial woes, not as a request for help, but as an accusation. My wealth, my security, my very existence had become a personal affront to him, a constant reminder of his own failure. My daughter Isabel just watched, her face pale with a mixture of anxiety and a daughter's desperate, misplaced loyalty. She was a willing hostage to his spiraling desperation. The moment came, as I knew it would, on a Thursday evening. They had come for dinner, a tense, miserable affair where the silence was broken only by the clinking of silverware and Julian's barely concealed sighs of frustration. I had just announced as calmly as I could that my financial advisors had strongly recommended against any high-risk loans at this time. The rage that flashed in his eyes was terrifying. It was pure, unfiltered venom. "So that's it then?" he snarled, throwing his napkin onto the table. "You're just going to sit here in this mausoleum on your mountain of money and watch me drown?" "Julian, please," Isabel whispered, her hand on his arm. He shook her off. No, I'm tired of being polite. We are her family, and she's treating us like strangers. This is not your money, Julian, I said, my voice as cold as ice. It is my husband's legacy, and I will not allow you to squander it on your foolish gambles. That was the spark. He stood up so abruptly that his chair scraped loudly against the marble floor. We'll see about that, he said, his voice a low, dangerous growl. He stormed out of the dining room and into the grand foyer. My heart was pounding, a frantic drum against my ribs. This was it, the moment Gable had prepared me for. I stood up and followed him, a calculated move to draw him towards our chosen stage. Julian, this conversation is not over, I said, my voice firm. He was standing at the bottom of the grand staircase, his back to me. He turned, and the look on his face was one of pure, unrestrained hatred. Oh, it's over, Genevieve, he said. It's all over. I began to walk up the stairs, as we had planned. I am going to my study, I said, my voice trembling slightly, a touch of genuine fear adding to the performance. And I would like you and Isabel to leave my house. Now. He watched me ascend, step by step. I could feel his eyes on my back, a physical, malevolent force. I reached the landing, about halfway up the sweeping curve of the staircase. I turned to look down at him one last time. And then he moved. He moved with a speed that was shocking, bounding up the stairs 2 at a time. Isabel screamed from the dining room doorway, a thin, useless sound. There was no time to react. He reached the landing, his face contorted into a mask of rage. He didn't say a word. He just put his hands on my shoulders. And he pushed. The world tilted, a violent, sickening lurch. I remember a kaleidoscope of images, the shocked, horrified face of my daughter, the triumphant, hateful glare in Julian's eyes, the glittering chandelier spinning wildly above me. My hand scrabbled for the banister, finding only air. And then, there was only the fall. A brutal, percussive journey down a mountain of unyielding marble. A final, blinding flash of pain. And then, darkness. I woke up to the steady, rhythmic beeping that I had dreaded. The fluorescent lights of a hospital room hummed above me. My head throbbed with a dull, immense pain, and my entire body felt like a single, shattered bruise. But I was alive, and more importantly, I was lucid. A young doctor was standing over me, shining a penlight into my eyes. Mrs. Croft, can you hear me? Do you know where you are? I'm in the hospital, I whispered, my voice hoarse. That's very good, he said with a relieved smile. You had a nasty fall, a severe concussion, 2 broken ribs, and a fractured wrist. But you're going to be okay. You're very lucky. I knew luck had had nothing to do with it. Gable's training had kicked in instinctively. I had twisted as I fell, protecting my head and absorbing the impact with the fleshier parts of my body. It was a miracle of physics and foresight. A moment later, my daughter and son-in-law rushed into the room. Isabel's face was a wreck of tear-streaked mascara and genuine terror. Julian, however, looked different. The rage was gone. He was pale, yes, but his expression was one of intense, anxious calculation. He was not a grieving relative. He was a perpetrator, returning to the scene of the crime to assess the damage. "Mother!" Isabel cried, rushing to my bedside. "Oh, thank God. We were so worried. We found you at the bottom of the stairs. You must have slipped." I looked at them. I looked at my weeping, guilt-ridden daughter. I looked at my son-in-law, the man who had tried to murder me, now feigning concern. And I delivered the most important performance of my life. I let my eyes wander around the room, a look of profound, childlike confusion on my face. "Isabel?" I whispered. What happened? I was walking up the stairs, and then, I don't remember anything else. It was a perfect lie, delivered with the authentic disorientation of a concussion victim. I focused on a point just past Julian's shoulder, as if I didn't quite recognize him. The last thing I remember is the clock chiming 9. The relief that washed over Julian's face was a physical thing. It was so pure, so absolute, that he almost sagged against the wall. He thought he had gotten away with it. Amnesia. The perfect, unexpected gift. The final, beautiful erasure of his crime. "You slipped, Mom," he said, his voice now full of a warm, convincing sympathy. "It was a terrible accident. But you're safe now. We're here for you." He took my hand. His skin was cold and clammy. I did not pull away. I let him hold it, this man who had tried to kill me, and I looked at him with wide, trusting, and completely vacant eyes. The game had changed. He thought he was the victor, the clever predator who had successfully eliminated the obstacle to his fortune. He had no idea that he was now a rat in a maze of my design. From my hospital bed, armed with a secret tablet Mr. Gable had smuggled in, I was no longer the victim. I was the silent, watchful god of his little doomed world, and I was about to watch him walk, step by greedy step, into the trap I had prepared for him. The real fall was not mine. It was his, and it was just beginning. The hospital became my new command center. By day, I was the perfect patient, frail, forgetful, and deeply grateful for my daughter and son-in-law's constant, cloying attention. I would ask the same questions over and over. Did the doctor say when I can go home? Was it a bad fall? Who are you again? This last one, delivered with a look of polite confusion, was a particular favorite of mine when Julian entered the room. It delighted me to see the flicker of irritation in his eyes before he masked it with a patient smile. By night, however, when the fluorescent lights were dimmed and the hospital corridors fell silent, I was a different woman. Mr. Gable had smuggled in a military-grade encrypted tablet disguised as a generic e-reader. From my bed, I had a god's eye view of my own home. The pinhole cameras Gable had installed were flawless. I could zoom in on the dust motes dancing in a sunbeam or listen to the quiet, desperate whispers of my son-in-law's crumbling life. And I watched. Oh, how I watched. I watched Julian walk through my home, no longer as a guest, but as its self-proclaimed new master. He would sit in Arthur's study, at Arthur's desk, running his hands over the aged leather and the polished wood with a greedy, proprietary air. He took calls from his creditors, his voice a smooth cascade of lies and false promises. "Just a small delay," he'd say, his back to a camera hidden in a leather-bound volume of Shakespeare. "My mother-in-law's unfortunate accident has complicated the estate transfer. But we're talking weeks, not months. The liquidity is coming." He was already spending my money in his mind. He was a man dying of thirst, and he believed he was standing on the shore of an ocean. My daughter Isabel was his unwitting accomplice. She was consumed by a tidal wave of guilt, and Julian weaponized it with masterful cruelty. He would sigh, running a hand through his hair in a gesture of weary martyrdom. "I don't know how we'll manage, darling, with your mother's new medical bills, on top of everything else." He would let the sentence hang in the air, allowing her to fill in the blanks. "Don't worry," she'd say, her voice full of a desperate need to fix things. "As soon as we have control of the estate, we can pay for the best care for her. It's what she would want." They were a perfect, symbiotic pair. He, the parasite, and she, the willing host. After a week of observation, I decided it was time to lay the bait. During one of their afternoon visits, I woke up from a nap with a look of sudden, panicked clarity. "The letter," I exclaimed, my voice a little too loud. Isabel rushed to my side. "What is it, Mother?" "What letter?" I clutched her hand, my eyes wide with feigned, foggy urgency. Before the fall, I was looking for a letter, an old letter from your father. It was very important, something about the bonds." "Bonds?" Julian asked from the foot of the bed, his interest instantly piqued. "What bonds, Genevieve?" I can't remember," I said, letting my face crumple in frustration. "My head is so jumbled. But I know it was important. I remember thinking, I need to put this somewhere safe. I hid it, right before I fell." I watched Julian's eyes. They were gleaming now, the hungry, predatory light back in full force. Bearer bonds, perhaps? Old stock certificates? A secret account? In his desperate mind, the bonds could be anything, as long as it was valuable. "Where, Mother?" Isabel asked gently. "Where did you hide it?" I closed my eyes, pretending to concentrate. It's fuzzy. I was on the stairs. I felt dizzy. I remember dropping it. It fell. Down. All the way down. I opened my eyes and looked at them, my expression one of helpless confusion. I think it's somewhere at the bottom of the stairs. The bait was laid. A hidden treasure, a forgetful old woman, and a clear, tantalizing location. I knew Julian's greed would be a force more powerful than any logic or caution. He would not be able to resist. Isabel, in her sweet, gullible innocence, relayed the information to him as soon as they got home. I watched them on my tablet. She said she hid a letter from Dad, Isabel told him, her voice full of hope. Something about some bonds. She thinks it's at the bottom of the stairs. Julian's reaction was a masterpiece of feigned nonchalance. Probably just her confusion, darling, he said, but his eyes kept darting towards the foyer. Don't worry about it. Let her rest. But he could not wait. That night, after Isabel was asleep, he crept from their bed. I watched, my heart a slow, steady, and cold rhythm in my chest, as his shadowy figure moved through the darkened house. He moved with a thief's silence, a ghost in the machine. He arrived at the grand foyer, the moonlight from the tall windows illuminating the marble staircase where he had tried to kill me. He got on his hands and knees. He began to search, his movements frantic and greedy. He ran his hands under the ornate console table that stood against the wall. He felt along the edges of the Persian rug. He peered into the shadows, his breath coming in short, excited gasps. And then he found it. Tucked deep into the intricate carving of the newel post at the very bottom of the staircase was a small, folded piece of old parchment. The note. My note. I zoomed in with the camera hidden in the grandfather clock, the image crystal clear in 4 kelvins. I watched as he pulled it from its hiding place, a look of pure, triumphant greed on his face. He had found it. The key to his salvation. He carefully, almost reverently, unfolded the note. And this is where the genius of Mr. Gable's plan truly revealed itself. From my hospital bed, I watched him on the encrypted tablet. The feed from the camera in the grandfather clock was perfectly clear, bathed in the cold, ethereal light of the moon filtering through the tall foyer windows. I watched as he got on his hands and knees, his expensive suit trousers dusting against the marble floor, his movements no longer those of a sophisticated financier, but of a common, greedy burglar. He was frantic, his breath fogging in the cool night air. He ran his hands under the ornate console table that stood against the wall. He felt along the edges of the Persian rug, his fingers scrabbling for anything that felt like a loose piece of paper. He peered into the shadows, a man completely consumed by the treasure hunt I had invented for him. And then, he found it. Tucked deep into the intricate wood carving of the newel post at the very bottom of the staircase, a spot Gable had prepared just a few days prior, was a small, folded piece of old parchment. The note. My note. I zoomed in with the camera, the image crystal clear in 4 kelvins. I watched his face, a mask of pure, triumphant greed in the moonlight. He had found it. The key to his salvation, the solution to all his problems. He looked around, a paranoid, furtive glance into the shadows before he carefully, almost reverently, unfolded the note. And this is where the genius of Mr. Gable's plan, the final, beautiful, and devastating piece of theater, truly revealed itself. Julian stood in the moonlit foyer, the small, folded note in his hand. He was so sure of his victory, so certain he held the key to my fortune, that he didn't notice the subtle, almost imperceptible click as his body heat, combined with his proximity to the newel post, activated a hidden thermal sensor. He didn't notice the soft, silent hum as a hidden recessed television screen, disguised as a modern art panel on the wall, powered on behind him, its screen still dark but alive. He unfolded the note with trembling, eager fingers. I watched his eyes scan the single, elegant line of my handwriting. It was not a clue to a treasure. It was a verdict. It read, "The proof of your crime is not in this note. It is all around you." He stared at the note, his expression shifting from triumphant greed to utter, profound confusion. And at that exact moment, on a silent, remote command from Mr. Gable, who was parked in a surveillance van down the street, the large screen on the wall behind Julian flickered to life. It did not show a movie or a news report. It showed him. The screen played a video, recorded in crystal clear, 4 kelvins resolution from the camera, hidden in the chandelier directly above the staircase. It showed the scene from that terrible night. It showed him, his face a mask of pure, unrestrained rage. It showed me, my voice a calm provocation as I ascended the stairs. It showed him bounding up the steps after me. And it showed, in brutal, undeniable, and multi-angled clarity from 3 separate cameras, the moment he put his hands on my shoulders and pushed. The video was a silent movie of his own damnation. It played on a loop, the push, the fall, the triumphant glare in his eyes, over and over. As he stood there, frozen in abject horror, watching his own crime play out on a 50-inch screen, the quiet, ambient sounds of the house were joined by another. The sound of a key turning in the front door. The door swung open. Standing there, silhouetted against the porch light, was Mr. Gable, his face grim and resolute. He was not alone. Behind him stood 2 grim-faced, uniformed police officers, their hands resting calmly on their belts. "Julian Thorne," Mr. Gable said, his voice calm, but with the cold finality of a closing coffin lid. "I believe you've just been watching the director's cut. We have a copy for the district attorney, along with the high-resolution stills." Julian let out a sound that was not quite human, a strangled gasp of a soul being ripped from its body. He spun around, his face a ruin of abject terror, and saw them. He looked from the police officers to the monstrous repeating video on the screen, and then his eyes finally landed on the small, glowing red light of the camera in the grandfather clock. He finally understood. The house was not a house. It was a witness box, and he, the clever predator, had been the star of a show he never knew he was in. It was at that precise moment of catastrophic revelation that my daughter Isabel appeared at the top of the stairs, a silk robe clutched around her, her face etched with sleep and confusion. "Julian? What is that noise? What's going on?" She started down the stairs, her eyes slowly adjusting to the scene in the foyer below. She saw her husband, pale and trembling, a strange note in his hand. She saw the grim-faced police officers at the door. And then she saw the screen. She stopped dead on the landing, the very spot where I had turned to face him. Her hand flew to her mouth as she watched the silent, monstrous video of the man she loved trying to murder her mother. The carefully constructed world she had lived in, the image of the perfect, charming, ambitious husband she had so blindly adored, it all disintegrated in a single, horrifying instant. Her scream was a thin, sharp sound of pure agony, the final, tragic soundtrack to his downfall. They arrested him, of course. The evidence was absolute, irrefutable. The video footage crystal clear from multiple angles. The financial records I had provided to Mr. Gable, establishing a clear motive of desperation and greed. The testimony of Mr. Gable himself. It was a swift, clean, and devastatingly efficient checkmate. He had walked into my home to steal a fortune, and he had walked out in handcuffs, his life in ruins, his future a bleak landscape of courtrooms and consequences. A week later, I came home from the rehabilitation center, my broken bones mending, my spirit, however, feeling stronger than it had in years. The house was quiet, scrubbed clean of the ugly drama that had unfolded within its walls. Mr. Gable, ever the professional, had had the secret cameras and sensors removed. My sanctuary was a sanctuary once more. My daughter was there, waiting for me in the living room. She was a ghost of her former self, pale and hollow-eyed, the blind adoration she'd had for her husband replaced by a terrible, clear-eyed understanding. The silence between us was heavy, filled with the ghosts of unspoken warnings and a lifetime of her misplaced trust. "I didn't know, Mother," she whispered, her voice raw from days of weeping. "I swear to you, I never would have. I never could have imagined." I looked at my daughter, and my heart, which had been so cold and hard with the need for justice, ached with a profound, maternal sorrow. "No, Isabel," I said, my voice soft. "You did not know, but you chose not to see. There is a difference." She began to sob then, a deep, racking grief for the man she thought she knew, and for the life that was now forever broken. I did not go to her. I did not comfort her. Some lessons, The hardest lessons must be learned alone. In the weeks that followed, the legal process ground forward with predictable, merciless efficiency. Julian, facing an ironclad case, pleaded guilty to aggravated assault and financial fraud. His life, and my daughter's, became a cascade of headlines and public shame. I, on the other hand, began the quiet work of reclaiming my own. I did not revel in his downfall. There is no victory in watching your own family tear itself apart. But there was a quiet, grim satisfaction in knowing that Arthur's legacy was safe, that my home was my own again, and that the man who had tried to take everything from me was now facing the cold, hard reality of a world without my fortune to cushion him. One evening, a month after his arrest, Isabel came to me. She was still fragile, but there was a new, faint glimmer of her old self in her eyes. "I'm selling our house," she said quietly, "and the cars, and everything. I'm going to pay back every penny he owes." "That is your choice, my dear," I said gently. And then she looked at me, her eyes full of a pain that was almost too much to bear. "And then I'm going to file for divorce." I simply nodded. The parasite had finally been removed. Now, the slow, painful healing of the host could begin. My husband was a man who believed in fail-safes. He had built an empire, a fortune, a life, all designed to withstand the worst storms. But he knew, with a wisdom that I was only now beginning to truly understand, that the most dangerous storms often come not from the outside world, but from within the walls of your own family. His final secret gift to me was not a system of cameras or a clever legal trap. It was the knowledge that I had the strength, the intelligence, and the courage to face that storm and to survive. And I had. Thank you for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your own story in the comments. Your voice, believe me, always matters.